Hi, I'm Dr. Debra Warner. I'm a forensic psychologist.
My name is Maureen Garcia, and based on my experiences and over 20 years of research, I write and speak on abuse dynamics within Christian environments.
And I'm going to be on a panel called Inside the Mind of a Predator.
For this year's Courage 365's The 30 Days of Courage event.
Please join us. It's for survivors and advocates.
And while yes, there will be heavy content, there will also be empowering, supportive, and hopeful content as well.
I can't wait because I think it's going to be a very, very fruitful discussion.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the 30 Days of Courage. I'm your host, Ashley Easter. I am the founder and executive director of Courage 365, and I am so excited that you're joining us for this live panel tonight. So if you are just joining us for the 30 Days of Courage, welcome, welcome. I'll tell you a bit about what we're doing this month. And if you are somebody returning from the last couple of panels this month, we're so glad to have you back. So Courage 365 is an organization here to support survivors of abuse, empower them with educational material, free resources, community support groups, all kinds of things like that. And for the month of October, during the 30 Days of Courage, we're having these live panels where there are discussions happening with brilliant people talking about things that are relevant to survivors and our healing journeys. And then at the end of the panel discussion, you get an opportunity to ask your questions in the comment section, and they'll be answered live. So make sure that whenever a question pops to your mind, you just drop it in the chat, and I'll scroll back through and find it. You can wait till the end to put your comments and questions, but if you just don't want to forget the question you have, because there's going to be a lot of juicy stuff tonight, make sure you put it in the comment section. Just do me a favor and make sure you use a question mark with your question, because as I'm skimming through at the end to find all of your questions, that stands out to my eye and I can see it better. So tonight we are going to be talking about inside the mind of a predator and really understanding what kind of goes into predatory behavior. We're doing this for two reasons. One, so we can become aware and understand the experiences we've gone through. And then two, so we can protect ourselves and move forward in our healing journey. So tonight we have Maureen Garcia and Dr. Debra Warner here with us, and I just want to invite you both onto the panel. Welcome to the 30 Days of Courage.
Thanks for having us.
I am so glad that you're here. And there's kind of like a short introduction trailer to both of you, but I wanted to kind of give you both the opportunity to give kind of the 1 to 2 minute recap of who you are, what you do, and kind of what you focus on in your advocacy work. And Dr. Debra, if you don't mind, I'll just let you go ahead and go first.
Well, yeah, I'm a forensic psychologist, and most people don't realize that's bringing the law and psychology together for the courts and explaining that for the courts. So one of the things I do is that I evaluate people and I evaluate predators and I help keep the world safe. And with, and I talk about that in some of the social media I do and in some of the books I write. But it is very important to me that people understand, how they can keep themselves safe and advocate for themselves when you're working with predators.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and you're actually a repeat guest. You're here last year talking about male survivors, and so I know you have a broad bandwidth of knowledge. Maureen, would you like to share a little bit about yourself? You're no stranger to Courage 365. You're on the board and have definitely been on our Courage Conversation show, but tell everybody a little bit about you.
So I am a survivor, and in addition to that, I started researching abuse dynamics in Christian environments because I was married to an abusive person who also sexually abused a relative of ours when she was between the ages of 9 and 12. So I am no longer married to that person, but I've spent the last 20 years, more than 20 years now, researching abuse dynamics to try to match up what the research says with what my experience is of living with this person and also having close relationships with other predators. So that's me.
Yeah, I think this is going to be such a valuable conversation because Maureen, you've lived a lot of this, and you've done the research, but you've also gone through these very difficult things. And so together, I think both of your knowledge coming together for this conversation is just going to be amazing. So, again, everybody, as you're listening, we're going to be going through a couple questions that I have for the panelists. But if anytime a question pops up for you, drop it in the chat, and at the very end, we're going to do a live Q&A. Just don't forget to use a question mark so I can find it more easily. All right, so I wanted to ask both of you this question. What kind of predators have you come into contact with either in your life or work? And Maureen, I know you kind of talked about that a little bit, so maybe you can get us started. But can you kind of share a little bit more about what kind of predators you're familiar with?
So my work brings me into contact with people who want to protect their Christian communities and environments from predators. But that also means that we end up talking a lot about people who are predatory that they've known or that they're trying to make decisions about. And that could be all types of abusers or predators. So you'll have sexual offenders, spousal abuse, physical abuse, high control, spiritual abuse, financial abuse. So all of that. In my life, the people that I've known, that I've been, or I was very close to, I would say that about 4 of them that I was very close to, all identified as Christian, evangelical Christian, and they were high control, emotionally abusive, psychologically abusive, all of them sexually abusive to different degrees and with different victims or different types of victims, physical abuse, emotional, just basically all of it. And it all kind of overlaps. So, yeah.
Wow. You really have seen the spectrum, and I think that's going to really provide value in this conversation. And Dr. Debra, what about you? What kind of predators do you tend to run into either in your life or in your work, or kind of a mix of both?
I have ran into just about every type working in the criminal system, right? But people don't really realize what the word predator actually means. So I'd like to define that a little bit. And a predator is someone who really takes advantage of another person to prey on them, right? And harm them pretty much for their own gratification or their own end, right? So that could be financial, that could be spiritual, that could be sexual, um, that could be preying upon more than just people, but also on animals or objects of that are out there. So, a predator is really someone who's out for themselves to prey. That's why the word predator is in there, to prey on another. So in the court, I have run across just about every type of predator that's out there. And there's also different levels of how they prey on people. So, and sometimes I have to explain that to the court because one of my jobs is to keep the public safe, but there's also a certain type of predator that is more harmful to other things than people.
Now that actually brings up a question that's not on the script. You talked about people who are predators towards people and animals, but then you said things, and then you brought up other things other than people. What does that mean? What does that even mean?
Well, I mean, there's people out there that have fetishes, right? And so they have fetishes on their predatory behaviors may involve people, but it's really for another means to gratify themselves in a different way, right? And so people can get into lots of fetishes in connecting things so that they get gratification. And so you have to realize people's minds can go anywhere. So if you can think it, someone probably has done it, right?
Yeah.
And so in doing that, I mean, there's people who have fetishes with cars, but in that fetish with the car, they may take advantage of somebody to get that need met, right? So there's different types of predators out there.
That's so interesting. Okay, so it could be like car theft, but car theft because it's a
Sexual
sexual
gratification to own
gratification.
it.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, okay. Thank you for clarifying that because that is not something I had thought about before in the conversation of predators. Um,
Yeah.
so what do you both, and whoever wants to go first is fine, but what makes somebody a predator? So do you feel like predators are just people who are born truly evil? Is it something that they're misguided or something in their childhood? Are they people who can change, or is it just sort of like a part of their DNA? And like, have they always been this way or they've become it? I know that's a lot of questions, but hopefully it'll spark a conversation of like, how does somebody become a predator? What's kind of like the understanding of a predator? Maureen, do you want to jump in? I can see
Sure.
your face. You got something
Yeah.
to say.
Sure. Um, so what makes a predator? That's a complicated question, and there are a lot of myths surrounding what makes a predator. But research tells us, and experts like Dr. Anna Salter, who her area of specialty is sex offenders, and Lundy Bancroft, whose area of expertise is interpersonal violence, or what we sometimes call domestic violence or domestic abuse, and they would basically say that your culture, your environment is going to contribute. It's not that there's a cause and an effect. There's no one cause. There's a number of different complex things that come together and contribute to somebody who becomes the type of person who can prey upon somebody and take advantage of somebody. So um, whether or not they're evil, that's a big question. So I don't even know how to begin. I can't address that here. But whether or not they can change, in theory, yes, they can, if they have people who hold them accountable, and hold them accountable more than they communicate compassion and empathy towards them. So they need to be held accountable. They need to have specialized therapy, ideally in a group setting with other people who have similar issues as them. It needs to be long term. And the type of change that you're looking for doesn't take place in weeks or months. We're talking years, many years. This is something Anna Salter would say, this is not something that can be changed or fixed or healed. It's something you live with for the rest of your life, and it can be managed, but it can never be cured. And Lundy Bancroft would say that a very, very tiny, tiny, tiny small percentage of very motivated people, usually motivated because everyone around them is holding them accountable, a very tiny percentage of people will change and have healthier interactions and behaviors and safer behaviors.
So
So
basically, don't get your hopes up. It's a small percentage, but for particularly sexual offenders and domestic violence offenders, like
yeah,
probably not a lot of change in your opinion. Okay, that makes
yeah,
sense.
they need to, and here's the other thing. A lot of us tend to think that somebody who is a spousal abuser has a problem with their anger, and somebody who's a sexual offender has a problem with their desire and their lust. But actually, what all abuse is, it's a misuse of some type of power. There's always going to be some power differential, even if it's not a formalized authoritative position of power. There'll be some kind of power, age difference, influence difference, charm difference, but there's always some misuse of power. And what Lundy Bancroft and Anna Salter both agree on in their different fields is that these people don't have a problem with anger. They don't have a problem with desire and lust. What they have a problem with is their values. They don't have a problem with their feelings. They have a problem with their values, their beliefs, and their attitudes.
Mm.
And in order for them to get better, they need to change under guidance those values, those beliefs, and those attitudes. And ultimately, Lundy Bancroft says it's not that they can't change, it's that the vast majority don't want to. They don't want beliefs and those attitudes and those values that allow them to be abusive. I can't hear you.
Your sound went out.
Mm-hmm. No, we can't hear you.
Would you like me to just answer the question if you can hear me?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay.
And then she can. Mhm.
So one of the things I wanted to explain is that when everybody has it in them to cross the line, and the difference is that you don't. So say something really bad happens to you and you want to
Right.
react to that. Like if it was me, someone harming my children would cause me to cross the line. The difference is I would stop once I achieve my goal of protecting my children.
Mhm.
Most people who are predators do not. They develop appetites. They develop a way of being in that. They like it, right? So whether they're a
Mhm.
sexual predator, whether they're a violence predator, whatever it is that they're preying on to meet their need, they continue to do that, right?
Mhm.
And so people don't understand that this is part of that person's makeup. Can they be changed? No. Okay, change
Mhm.
isn't going to happen. What will happen is that you can change behavior. You can change how they interact in the world, right?
Yes.
Because you have to look at, let's say, someone who's a sexual predator and they molest children. They don't like men or women in the traditional sense. They like to be with children, whether they're a regressed pedophile, a fixed pedophile, or a power and control pedophile. They like that dominance. They like what that brings to them in that psyche of the different types of pedophilia. Okay. So they're going to continue to like that, like I am attracted to men. The difference is it's illegal and it hurts other people.
Yep.
And that's why you
Mhm.
have all of these behaviors just sneaking around. So that is what you have to change is the behaviors that go with it. Same with someone who's in domestic violence, right? Okay, someone who's doing that, they're violent because they have something with them. They are feeling insecure. They are having their issues. They are acting that out. So you have to deal with those underlying currents to stop the behavior. So is that going to change? Or are they going to change? No. Can their behavior change? Yes. But chances are, because that's how they are made up and that switch has not turned off, they're going to stay in that state of being.
Mm. Can you all hear me okay now?
Now,
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Great. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I see so much crossover between what the two of you are saying. You're kind of hitting the conversation at different angles, but really coming up so similarly. Do either of you have anything more on that question or anything to follow up on before we move on? It's just this is so helpful.
I don't want to give everybody the doom and gloom. I mean, but I mean, there are people out there who stay with their partners who have gone down this path, and the problem is that you have to get your own support because there's something with you that you're continuing a relationship with somebody who is hurting other people, right? And so that is about you. That's not about them. And that's one of the things I want people to understand. You have to separate your own needs and issues out from whoever you're with who may be perpetrating these offenses.
Mhm. I had a lot of people who wanted me to stay with my ex-husband.
Yeah,
So that becomes an issue too, because whether or not um, you know I want to leave, what kind of supports do I have to do so? You're risking your entire community in some cases. I was lucky enough to have people who had a clue, um, and I had loving parents and loving friends, and but for a lot of people, they don't have finances, they don't have support.
right.
Um, so,
Imagine
but
if
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, imagine this is someone who is beating, his wife who's and they have 10 kids and she has no education.
Yep. Hmm. Yeah.
I mean, where's she going to go? She doesn't even see a way out of it, right?
Right.
But she wants to
Of course.
stay. She thinks if he's hitting her, if he doesn't hit the kids, like
Right.
this is what's going on, So don't be so quick to judge someone,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Try to
Yeah, I
give them
agree.
support they need so they can move forward and take one step a day. But
Hmm.
it's really hard because it is so wrong what they're doing,
Yeah.
but also
Hmm.
it's a mindset about what they're doing and they truly don't believe it because they need to behave that way for some reason.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
This is
Hmm.
really, really fascinating. Um, okay, so the thing that's coming up for me kind of goes into our next question, which is it's so hard for me, and I think a lot of our audience, to really be able to imagine going inside the mind of a predator, because I've got empathy, our audience has empathy, you two have empathy, and there's just something inside of me that can't even imagine doing some of the terrible things that predators do, and yet they do it, and they do it repeatedly,
Yeah.
and they do it often without any seeming sense of remorse. And so I'm just trying to figure out, like, what is it that makes a predator different than the rest of us? Was that sort of answered in the last question with their decisions around actions? But it seems like it's deeper than that, because I don't even have to decide not to be a predator. Like, I would never want
Right.
to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Deborah touched on this when she said, we all have these desires or impulses, but we don't act on them. And if we do, it's in some specific situation that has a specific goal, and it's not part of our identity, who we are, how we view the world. It just, it is what it is. But for predators, what happens is that they have cognitive distortions in how they think, errors in how they think. And these errors are the things that allow them to and justify their abuse that they commit, whatever type of abuse that is. So one really common error is, I'm entitled to anything I want, however I have to get it. And entitlement is a huge, like, we all have issues with entitlement, but to varying degrees. But someone who's abusive, who's a predator, just like Debra said earlier on, they will intentionally take advantage of people who are more vulnerable than them, or animals who are more vulnerable than them. Because again, they're misusing power. But it's those cognitive distortions. I'm entitled to whatever I want. It doesn't matter who gets hurt. It's the other person's fault, whatever I do. It's justified somehow. They shift blame to other people. They don't take responsibility or ownership. But these are the types of things that allow them to do the things that are so harmful and destructive and abusive. So, and it's not just that they do things that are abusive. They create environments where people, when people are interacting with, like when we talk about cults or high control or coercive control, they're creating relationships and environments where when people are interacting with them, there are certain rules, and those rules are the predator's rules, and they feel entitled to be able to tell other people how they should be, what they should do, how they should interact with them. You're the one who has to take care of my emotional needs. You're the one who has to take care of my sexual needs. You're the one who has to take care of my physical needs. And if you don't, in whatever degree, I'm justified in harming you in whatever way is my abusive way.
That's really
And
good.
another thing is that they spin the narrative, right?
Oh,
So
yes.
they're painting a story
Yes.
that they want you to believe, because they have to continue that narrative, right?
Yep.
And so whoever they interact with, they've spun it in a way that they can continue to go down this path and
Yep.
do what they're doing, and they get better and better. I always tell people, for every one victim you hear, there's 10 more.
Yes.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And people
Yes.
don't realize that.
Yep.
They don't realize there's more of them out there. They've just gotten better at it. And some of them, they just haven't gotten caught. But there's also, I want people to know, there are disorders out there. There's the manual called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Okay. And you can go and read this, but you may not understand. It's a lot of gobbledygook. But there are also disorders out there where there are remorse for people who explode. There's one called, intermittent explosive disorder. And the difference in that, in someone who's antisocial people don't care. People with intermittent explosive disorder cannot control what happens, and they feel remorseful. So they just explode. It doesn't mean that they don't create environments where they can explode and people accept them, right? It just means that they don't want to be like that, and they don't know how, but somehow they have learned that that is how you react to things. Right? So I want people to understand there are different types of people who do these things, and some do have remorse because of what has happened to them. I can think of quite a few cases where someone had intermittent explosive disorder. They didn't want to act like that. This doesn't mean that they didn't spin the narrative so that they could. Right? It just meant I had an easier time in treatment because there was a remorse factor. right? Okay.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what happens when I'm interacting a lot with churches. Churches see what they view as genuine remorse. And it
Right.
could be authentic, sincere remorse at that
Right.
moment, that expression of
Right.
feelings. But that doesn't mean that it's genuine repentance and you've now begun to change your life and it's going to be a lifelong journey.
Right. Right.
And so, one thing that people need to understand is that the research shows that there is no correlation between feeling remorse and guilt and changing. So people who express guilt and remorse and people who don't that are abusive, there's no difference in their journey of changing. It takes the same amount of, accountability from other people, people holding them accountable, people calling them on their spin. But to call
Right.
them on their spin, you have to understand how they spin, what those
Right.
cognitive errors they have are. And for you, Deborah, I can't even imagine, because you're going into courts where people, this isn't their area of specialty, and you have to explain to them, I know this person looks trustworthy, but they're really dangerous.
Right.
But they sound good. They sound like they're doing the things they're supposed to do. So you kind of have to always highlight, like you said earlier, Deborah, the behavior over whatever the person is saying or how they're minimizing or justifying. You have to look at their behavior and hold them accountable for their behavior consistently all the time. Because that is again, if very few do change to any degree, or if none change, the only way to keep people safe is to hold these people accountable and to make tough decisions when you assess that there's a risk.
Right. And looking at the history, I'm not talking about the one time somebody did something and then they may not ever do it again. I'm talking about the combined history,
Yep.
right? Of you've been doing this for how many years, you've been caught. First of all, you're not very good at it, but that's a whole nother subject, right? But but also you've been doing this, right? And you have shown this pattern of behavior that has not changed. And some of it can be minor, some of it may be a buildup. You see it from childhood, whatever.
Yes.
That means that you don't deserve to be out there. And I've sat in court with people and I've had their defense attorneys tell me, well, how do you know for certain? I said, there is no certain. But if you've been doing this for 10 years, you've been doing the same thing, pretty much you're going to do it again. You're just going to find another way to meet whatever this need is for you to prey upon someone else. Right.
Yes.
And so you have to be very, very clear on that,
Yep.
and yes, I have to make sense of that. And there are times when I need a shower or some of the things that I have heard in that courtroom, but you have to be objective. I can't put emotion into it. I feel sorry that that happened to you in your childhood. It doesn't change that there are lots of people that happens to, and they make other choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So what about all those other people?
Right.
Please help me explain that. And then when they have nothing for me, I give the opportunity. I'm saying, so you cannot make a different path, even if it's carved out for you. That means that we have to change. We have to try to change that, but we have to make the path for you. We have to make the decision so that you can have the path that you need to take, because you're not going to make it.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Wow. This is such powerful information. I'm just like soaking it in. And I also, I think it's a really interesting thing. Both of you kind of brought this up in different places, but there's a difference between somebody who does something one time and somebody who has a repeated pattern of it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that one time they did that thing, that it wasn't incredibly devastating to the person or people that it happened to. But there's like different categories of people who are likely to offend over and over again. Is that what I'm hearing? Am I understanding that properly?
And technically, so if I assault someone, I've committed assault. I'm guilty of assault. Right. But that doesn't necessarily make me abusive or a predator. A predator is someone who intentionally, and this is the thing we all have to understand, they don't fall into sin. They don't lose their temper. They intentionally set people up, justify their actions. So they intentionally behave in a way that is a pattern of behavior over time. And that's the thing that differentiates someone who, they did lose their temper and hit somebody, and somebody who's abusive, someone who's going to financially abuse, spiritually abuse, or overlap different types of abuse. There you'll see patterns of behavior. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
They're running towards being predatory, where other people are, okay, I assaulted this person, I'm not going to do it again, but there's a reason, right?
Yeah.
The predator is running towards continuing that journey of
Yeah.
doing that behavior. Someone who does it once and never does it again is not on that path.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you're looking at. You're looking at all those clues. You're looking at all those things people don't say to you, right? Like, here's an example. I was evaluating somebody who stole a goat recently, right? And yeah, I was like, well, I don't understand. But what got me was that someone said to me, "So did he have sex with it?" That is not where my mind went.
Yes, of course not. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I am concerned about the questioner more than I'm
Yes.
concerned about the guy who stole the goat now, because I'm thinking you're not somebody who thinks along a straight and narrow line like I do, because I'm going like, okay, was he hungry? Was he homeless? Like, these are things are going
Right.
I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
going that
Mm-hmm.
he went and did this deviant act. Now I'm concerned about who you are who asked me that question.
And you are not
Those are
allowed
the
near
things
my
people need to,
pets.
huh?
That
What'd you
guy's
say?
not allowed near my pets.
No,
Once you say, oh,
not my pets, not my kids, not riding in my car to get a ride to the bus station. Like,
nope.
you're not going to be in my life because you have a line of thought that does not jive with me.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
true.
interesting.
Mhm.
That's also a fascinating thing, like when predation happens or when it doesn't even happen. I guess let me rephrase that. It's interesting the conclusions that people jump to when there's not anything pointing to that conclusion
Right.
outwardly. So unless they had other knowledge that somebody else didn't know about, like there wasn't anything in this guy stole a goat that would make you think that that was the reason for suing it. Like you said, food, pet, maybe they're just mentally unstable and thought it would be fun. You know, like just
Yeah.
a lot of reasons, but that
Mhm.
wouldn't be where you jump to unless there were other cues. And so that does kind of call into question like what's going on in that person's mind because there wasn't anything pointing to that.
No.
Yeah, that's
And I've
Although,
had many,
go
huh?
ahead. Go ahead.
No, I've had many people do things with animals, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But in this particular instance, like you're saying, Ashley, there was no reason to take
Mm-hmm.
that leap. And I've seen the macabre, and I wasn't taking that leap. So that told me, like, wow, okay, hey, Joe, like, we ain't friends. Like, you know.
oh my god. Sometimes you need to see the red flags and just
Yeah.
go along. Not.
When someone shows you who they are, believe them and keep
Yes.
walking. Okay? So I was stepping. Like,
Oh my god. Wow. Wow. Oh my
So
god.
this can actually be, this is one of the things that happens though in the other direction. So like, this guy is like, what was he doing with the goat? But when most people, including myself years ago, would hear that somebody had sexually violated a child, my thought was, how could anybody do that? Because I couldn't imagine anybody having that desire and then acting upon it. That's just, So what happens often is, you'll hear things on the news about, oh, this famous person has like 60 victims, and people automatically think that can't be true. I can't imagine someone doing that because they're thinking like a person who's not a predator.
Right.
So, and there's a degree of naiveness there, which, is probably a healthy thing. But the more you learn about how predators think and the things they do and how bold they are in how they abuse people and the fact that they abuse when other people are around or in the next room or, like Larry Nassar abusing children with their parents having conversations with them. That is, you have to be a very entitled, arrogant individual who is confident that you're not going to be caught or called out on this. And he had a good reason to be confident at that point because, he wasn't called to account for so many years. Right. But they're very, very bold. And for most of us, that is wild. We think, how could anybody ever possibly be that person? And so we need to learn how these people think so that when there is somebody in our environment that's showing concerning behaviors, or if we hear an allegation, we can begin to discern what is actually, normal, for lack of a better word, for someone who's a predator. Because we need to not be naive. Anna Salter says that the best defense that we have against abusers is knowledge, but that, it comes at a cost, because you have to learn this stuff, and it's very disturbing and uncomfortable to learn this stuff, which is why you have people like Debra and me and Ashley who are experts in this stuff, because we have a capacity to learn it, and then we can just give you guys the information you need, and then you can run with it.
Yeah.
Right. And we somehow like learning it, right? Most people don't want to come out of their little glass castles. They want to believe that this isn't happening. They want to believe that people have the better good in their mind. But how many people are incarcerated?
Yeah.
Okay. For these things, for sex crimes with children, or preying on people for other means. Okay. People do it. Like I said earlier, if you can think it, somebody's done it.
Exactly.
Now you may not know about it, but it has happened, right? We have to not bury our heads in the sand anymore. And your best weapon is your gut. Even me, I get duped sometimes, right? But my gut is screaming at me about something. I stop and listen to that gut, and usually it's spot on that there's something off. Don't be afraid, especially us as women, to be afraid to be assertive or to be impolite.
Yeah.
Because society has told us to be polite to people, especially men. You don't have to be polite to anyone. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. Just recently, my mother and me were in Las Vegas, and this cab driver was just nasty to me about a tip. She goes, "Oh, you should just give him a tip." I said, "I don't have to give my money to anyone who I don't want to. And I do not have to take a cab ride from anyone I do not want to." That concept was so foreign to her. But if more of us, especially people who are vulnerable, took that position, it would change. The guy looked at me like I was completely out of my mind, because I said it to his face. I said, "There are other options. It's not you." That's not cruel or mean. That's just assertive.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. And I think that kind of goes into, I want to kind of combine the last two questions, because I think they kind of play into each other, which is, what are some of the signs to look for in a potential predator, but then also what can we do to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe? And so I know you've talked about education, Maureen. I know Dr. Debra, you've talked about being assertive, but what do we need to be on the lookout for, and what can we do to try to protect ourselves?
Yeah. For me, thinking of the relationships that, the people I loved that were abusive, they all had significant issues with boundaries. If someone cannot tolerate and adhere to a small boundary, you cannot trust them to adhere to a larger criminal, illegal boundary. So look for, that would be a concerning behavior, somebody not taking your no as a no. So if you say no to someone and they keep trying to move kind of laterally to get you to agree to what they want you to, or they just outright violate your boundary, that's a big concern. And then entitlement, like I said before, if someone has a great degree of entitlement, your cab driver, Debra, had entitlement there. He felt justified being rude to you. How unprofessional is that? Because he felt entitled to you giving him a tip, whether or not you chose to give him a tip. So that doesn't make that guy a predator, but that makes him, not a good cab driver, or at least for that day in that moment. And if there's a pattern of this, it makes him not a safe cab driver, because he's basically threatening women who aren't doing what he wants them to do.
Right.
So entitlement, boundary violations, showing concerning behavior. And yeah, Debra talked about spin. If someone tells you that somebody did something harmful to them, and then you go and you talk to that person and they give you a story that has enough of the truth in it, but it sounds like the harmful, damaging thing was justified from their point of view, most likely you're being manipulated and victim stanced by an abuser. But that's something to keep in mind too. Like, does somebody own when they've harmed somebody? Do they take responsibility for it? Do they try to make amends? Or do they spin, justify, minimize, blame the other person? So those are the kind of things that I would look for. So entitlement, boundary violations, and the spin.
That's good.
The boundary violation is huge because dude, they want to get in. They want to violate.
Yep.
They want to wear you down, okay? So that you give in to them, okay? But the one thing I tell people is to pay attention to who they're treating, who is not you, right? So the waiter that they are talking to, and they talk to them like, belittle them, right? The power control they try to have over other people, how they talk to their doctor, or how they talk to the guy who delivers their mail, right? How they treat their dog, how they treat their spouse, their mother. There's something with gender. How do they treat the opposite sex gender if that is what you're there for, if that's the relationship you're in, or the same sex gender, right? Pay attention to those things and don't close your eyes to it because you want that relationship so bad, or they seem so great on paper. Everybody can seem great, and everybody can perfect their craft. And you have to realize predators are a craft. It is a job for them, and they're trying to get in with you. And the minute you see a flag, question it and see what that response is. That you don't like that response, there's a reason you don't like that response. Or they try to reflect it on you. You ask a question and say, well, do you want to do that? And you're like, that's not what I asked you. Why are you giving me that response? Those are things that you go, hey, that's not okay. And the minute you're saying that's not okay a lot, that's when you need to reevaluate how you're showing up in that relationship, because somehow you're not protecting yourself, and you need to see how you're showing up. You can't change how they show up. They're showing up the way they want to show up. That's how they want to show up with you. But how are you showing up in that relationship that is causing you so much inner turmoil?
Yeah. That's all amazing. That's good. Something you said just made me think of something. Yeah, another thing I would watch for would be if they were in long-term relationships and now they tell you that ended because their ex was crazy. Every player I know had crazy exes.
They all have crazy exes, and they're all crazy, and it's all not their fault.
Nothing was their fault. It's always the other person's fault.
It's always the other person's fault. And they have a list of things why, and they call them names. And, I'll be honest, I've had a few exes, but I have never done that.
I've had crazy exes.
Yeah.
But I'm not the one who calls them crazy. Other people had to come and affirm to me, oh, those people are crazy.
Yeah. That was kind of nutty. That's what they say. That's police, nutty.
Pastors, people who are authorities, and my reality checkers in my life have come to me and said they're out of their minds. And I'd be like,
you gotta go.
But what you're saying about like paying attention and protecting yourself, that's really, really important. And that goes back to, Ashley talks about this all the time, and you mentioned it too, the whole your intuition, your gut, that we need to be able to listen to it. And one of the long-term, super damaging effects of having been abused is that your intuition gets damaged.
Yes.
Because if someone betrays you and deceives you, and here's the thing about offenders, they're so good at their skill, because not only do they deceive everyone around them, they also self-deceive and often believe themselves when they deceive themselves. So when they lie to others, it sounds very plausible. But what needs to happen is you need to be able to regain your ability to trust yourself. Because if you didn't perceive reality when that person was deceiving you and betraying you, how can you trust yourself to perceive reality correctly now? And that's something, it's, most of us think, oh yeah, obviously you have to learn on trusting other people, but a big part of that is learning to trust yourself again. And there's ways to do it. There's therapy, there's intuition training, there's all kinds of different things, but just be aware of that trusting yourself is something that is huge in learning to protect yourself and to protect others around you.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, we've got some questions here from the audience, and I'm excited to jump in. We'll see if both of you answer each question, or like if just one of you does, because I want to try to get through all of them. Again, people who are listening and tuning in, if you're dropping questions, use a question mark, because if I don't see a question mark, I'm probably going to skim past your question. That's just how my eyes work. So this first one is interesting. It says, how do you spot when some of these predators are actually lawyers in the legal and or court system? It seems that a law degree expressly teaches coercive control, manipulation tactics, are dangerous in unethical hands. How can you protect yourself? Maybe specific red flags to look for in lawyers. I think that's interesting because, yeah, lawyers are often taught um, manipulation tactics to get answers, and that could be used positively or negatively. And yeah,
Exactly. Hmm. Yeah.
thoughts.
And I'm not sure about high control. Like, I mean, I've met lawyers and judges that definitely had a control kind of vibe to them, interacting with them, and said really concerning things in defense of, my ex-husband. Like the judge one time called him, what did he say? He called him a man of integrity in the courtroom. And I went, wait, are we talking about the same dude? The guy that just, he just admitted to you he molested a child for 3 years and he's a man of integrity. I don't want to know what you think a bad man looks like. But I've met some high control people, but it seemed more that they were just high control because they were who they were, not necessarily because they were lawyers. Although lawyers have to be skilled at spin. It's part of the job. And Debra, I'm sure you run into this so much more, because I ran into it on the side of going to court with people as an advocate or being in court myself, for different things, with loved ones. But you're on the other side, you're like,
this is a loaded question for me.
Mhm.
Because I also have training as an attorney and a psychologist, because that's part of my degree. So,
Yeah.
a lot of times I know what's going on more than most people do, in that courtroom as a psychologist. But I would say if you have a lawyer who is good at that and they do their job, let them do their job.
Mhm.
Okay. And don't try and change them because you're not a lawyer. There's a reason they're doing what they're doing. Now, if you're dating them and they're doing this and you feel this way, then that's not the relationship for you. Right?
Right.
Because lawyers are trained to be coercive. Lawyers are trained to be controlling. They have to take control of it. They have, as my lawyer says, I have to be a mean lawyer, right? Well, they're supposed to be. They're supposed to advocate for you, right?
Mhm.
But I can understand where the person's coming from, because sometimes being a lawyer is very intimidating to people when they hear that, because of the training that lawyers get. And sometimes everybody's not a nice person. You have unnice mailmen, you have unnice doctors, you have unnice lawyers. That's not a good fit for you. And that's
Mhm.
where that intuition comes in again. This is not a good thing for me to be doing. Therefore, I'm going to go do something else. Never feel bad about making choices that are right for you.
Absolutely.
Right?
Mhm.
Because that person's going to move on eventually. If they're not completely cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? They're going to move on and go on to somebody else. And that's what you want. So, and also I want to add to this, when someone's like that and you've moved on from them, don't chase them because you liked how that felt when it was still good.
Mhm.
There's a reason your gut's going off. Yeah, there's always good there. Okay. And cherish it and have those good memories, but don't chase after somebody, because again, that's when you need to check how you're showing up.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both. I like how you both addressed it from different angles because, Maureen, you've experienced some of the very inappropriateness of it. And Dr. Deborah, you have seen where sometimes they have to use certain mechanisms and tools to
Yeah.
support victims and survivors. And it is a messy thing.
I
Yeah.
do want to say, in defense of some lawyers,
Yeah.
I know lawyers that have prosecuted sex crimes,
Mm-hmm.
abuse against children, that kind of thing. And I work alongside lawyers that do investigations, and they're there because they want to catch the bad guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when they are, and they have so much empathy interviewing witnesses and victims and even predators. But when they have to be tough, they're tough, but they're doing good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they're not all bad. Just so
They're not all bad. I know.
They're not.
They're not. I've had some good ones. Okay, let me see this. I wonder about abusers that don't even realize what they're doing because that's all they know from growing up, like passive aggressive stuff. I guess I might rework that question and just ask, do you think that abusers or predators don't know what they're doing? Or do they know what they're doing and we just can't imagine that they know what they're doing, because how could someone do that?
Even the ones that aren't self-aware know what they're doing.
Yeah.
A physical abuser can be beating his wife, and if the cops show up at the door, immediately he is sane, calm, she's freaking out, crying. If he didn't know what he was doing, he wouldn't change his behavior.
Yeah.
A physical abuser can punch his girlfriend in the face and feel justified because she said or did something or wore something he didn't like, but he would never treat his mother that way, because what are you, out of your mind? You don't treat your mother that way. Only really abusive people treat their mother that way. So they know what they're doing. They might not be as cognizant of their motivations, but they are very, and this is the thing that people need to understand. If you come away with one thing tonight learning about the inside of a predator's mind, they are intentional. They use tactics that are set up to choose victims, gain access to those victims, relate to those victims, groom people around that victim so that the people think that they would never do the things that they're actually doing. This is intentional. It's all of it. Even the most bizarrely unself-aware human being you know that's abusive, if they're doing a pattern of abusive behavior, it's intentional and they know it.
Right. And I will say this, if there are secrets involved,
Yes.
they're a predator. Okay.
Yep.
Because the things that they're doing, they don't want it in the light.
Yep.
And if there's other choices that could be made, right? Like, I don't do that to my mother. Like she said, there's a secret involved around it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they're saying, don't tell people this, keep this in the family. We don't share our business. Well, if it's not bad, why can't people know?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So that is what you need to look at. Now, if you're talking about people who do verbal abuse and they shut you out, or they do the circle talk with you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you think they don't know that because that's how their family talks, right? But just ask yourself this question. Does it ever feel good when that's happening? Do they ever think it feels good when their family does it to them? Let's not give a cop out because they've learned that.
Mm-hmm.
They know it doesn't feel right, but that's all they know how to do. So it doesn't mean that it's not predatory or it's not abusive. It just means they need another tools in their toolbox, and are they willing to listen to that? And if they're not, then they definitely are a predator and not someone who's just naive to training or teaching. That's not cultural either. I hear that a lot. Well, that's cultural. That's part of my culture. No, not all cultures do that. They don't all beat their wives or their kids or molest their children or all of those things. They don't do that. There are boundaries. There are cultural things that people just know that are wrong. And so that's a cop out also.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
These
Abuse, there's no, sorry.
Go
There's
ahead.
no category that abuse doesn't cross. Economic,
Right.
race, ethnicity, it doesn't matter. Education, abuse happens among humans. It's a human problem, not a culture problem. Well, I mean, it's a culture problem, but it's not a specific culture problem.
Right. Right. And I'm not saying that there isn't diversity in the world, and we should honor diversity and we should honor people's cultures, but nobody wants to be hit. Nobody wants to be molested.
Right.
Okay. These are things that are just line crossers. So you can't hide behind that because people don't want to be in pain. And if it's causing pain and it's a secret, then that's different than being in a cultural situation or a diversity situation.
That's good. All that, both of you, so good, so good. Got another question here. It says, coming out of a high control religious culture, what go-to questions are good to ask leadership if you're seeking a new healthy church environment? I'm guessing because we're talking about predators, maybe they had run into predators in a religious setting. And so, like, if you're going into a new religious setting, or I think we could broaden this to any kind of new group, what would be some good questions to ask to kind of suss out if there's any predatory things going on there?
The first thing I want people to say is go ask them if they do background checks and how often. Because they'll say, oh yeah, I did one. When? Oh, whenever someone starts. Well, how long has Pete been working here? Oh, 10 years. Have you redone it?
Right.
You ask that question, because a lot of times they don't. They say, well, everybody vouches for him. Oh, everybody vouches for him. Okay, that's not what I'm asking you. And when you get that kind of response, that means that they basically want to bury it. They don't want to do anything. That may not be the right setting for you. Now, if they say, we background check everybody who works with our children, we background check everybody who's in leadership, that is something that's quite, unique. And it's a church that's going to listen if something happens. They're not going to make you feel bad for reporting it.
Maureen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. In addition to that, I would want to know what their policies and procedures are if somebody is exhibiting concerning behavior, and or if there's an allegation of abuse. And then if they have good policies and procedures, I would want to know, tell me about a couple of times where you had to use them. How did you put those policies into practice? How did you treat those survivors? How did you support those survivors and their loved ones? How did you make other potential victims and survivors in the community feel safe? And I would just ask them questions like, if a child came and disclosed sexual abuse, what would be your response? Would you immediately report? Would you blame the teenager because she, was touching the youth pastor too much? Or like, how would they respond to these things? And, I would just see like what's their basic posture when they're talking about or interacting with any of these topics? Are they more concerned for the victim, or are they more concerned with, well, we need to help rehabilitate and redeem the abuser kind of a thing?
Right. Is there image in question? Like, what is that? I mean, we've all seen, and I won't say the name, but, they have like 20 kids and counting or whatever, and how they responded to that.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes, exactly.
That's classic. Right?
Yeah.
And so what are you doing to keep that family safe? What are you doing to show that this is not okay in your religious culture, right? So how are we going to work together to talk about that? Asking those tough questions. And if they're uncomfortable, if they don't want to talk to you, if they tell you this isn't the church for you, or if you come to church and nobody looks at you, you have an answer.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Listen to that answer, because that's what's going to happen to you if you speak up about anything.
Yeah, that's so good.
And you might interact with a church that doesn't have good policies and doesn't have good responses, but that are very sincerely, earnestly willing to learn. And then that's your place. You can come alongside them. You can start to invite child advocacy people. You can invite someone like Debra from the courts to come. You can invite different people, make sure that they're starting to platform victims in their community, that they're educating themselves, that, there are pastors reading books and going to trainings and learning, how to make this a safe environment. So,
my son's preschool, they wanted them to change their clothes all in the open in front of everybody with people walking by. And I said, absolutely, we're not doing this. And they couldn't understand why I was flipping out. So, but the difference in this preschool was they were open to hearing. So me and my husband went and did a 2-hour seminar for them for free to explain why these behaviors aren't good and what they can do instead. Now that's a place, right, that is open for change. And I was okay with my son staying there, because they were listening. They just didn't have anyone to tell them, hey, you don't know what the janitor's mindset is when he's walking by and all these little kids are changing their clothes. So
yeah. And then one other thing you just made me think of is, if you're going to some kind of a religious community, and you're asking kind of questions, you want to see if they're teachable. If they think that they already know all the answers, that is not someplace you want to be. You want to be around people who, we have a new law enforcement person who's coming to our congregation and they know a lot about this. Well, let's hear from them. Or there's a new book out about this. Let's read it. You don't want someone who's like, nope, we already know all the things, and they're completely unteachable.
And this is any church, no matter what religion you're in. Okay.
Absolutely.
So we're not pigeonholing one. This is all denominations and all faiths.
Any religious organization, if they're not willing to learn, they are not safe people.
Yeah.
Right.
That's also good. And one thing that was just coming to my mind is the kind of the layered effect you both are kind of talking about. So, yeah, 100% they should have background checks. But we know that background checks only work if somebody's been caught,
Right.
um, and
Right.
then prosecuted. But
Mhm.
then, Maureen, you're talking about like having safe policies, and then Dr. Debra, you're talking about how, like, are they teachable? And like, just I think these
Mhm.
kinds of layers, all of them are important. If there's just one there but not the other, that's kind of a concerning thing.
Yes.
But kind of working together to create safe environments for children and adults, as
Mhm.
well.
Right. They could change their policies and then implement background checks, or have background checks and implement policies, but they're willing to do those things.
Right.
That's the thing you need to listen to.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so
Yep.
good. Well, I think that's all the time we've got for questions tonight, but I just wanted to see, do either of you have anything that is just kind of burning on your mind that you like to leave people with?
There's so much.
Yeah.
But I think that if we start as a society, like I always say, let's listen, let's love, and people don't know what that really means. And it means I'm talking right now, wah, 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 like Charlie Brown. You hear me speaking, right?
Mhm.
You hear me speaking words. But are you listening to the words I'm saying? Are they getting in your soul? Are you paying attention, right? And then if you listen and you hear that and you take it in, how are you responding? Are you responding negatively? Are you, when the words come out of your mouth, are all the words that come out of your mouth in love and kindness? And if we can begin to talk in love to anyone, no matter what we're saying, thinking, is that going to hurt them? Is that going to hurt someone else? Like all that stuff, then things can change because we're listening and then we're responding in love. Right. So that is what I want people to do, is start thinking about how we interact and listen with love for our fellow humans.
Mhm.
So good. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, for me, one of the things that I come across a lot is, this assumption that people think, if there was a predator in my family, in my community, in my church, in my team that I coach, or among my coaches, or in my school, or in my synagogue, or wherever, I would know. I'd recognize them. Yeah. But, coming from someone who lived with one for more than a decade and was very close with a number of other ones for, for decades, you don't know. You don't know. They intentionally set up their life so that it looks like they wouldn't be the type of person that does that. And that goes back to Debra's, the whole, do they want you to keep secrets? Because abusers will want you to keep secrets. But people think that they can identify abusers. And while abuse itself is a monstrous thing and the impact is monstrous on us, abusers are not monsters. To call them monsters removes some of the responsibility for them,
Right.
from them. They are human beings that are making intentional choices to harm somebody else and to, to devastate and damage somebody else intentionally. So they're not monsters. They don't have any identifying marks that mark them out. You can't profile abusers because they're so vastly different. They have common things like their cognitive errors and certain tactics that they use, but they're not monsters. They're human beings, and they need to be held responsible for the choices that they make when they decide that they're going to harm other human beings. They are very good at lying. And so don't ever, I've been doing this for a really long time, and sometimes I'll meet somebody and I get a familiar feeling. And at some point, I think I might have actually been talking to you, Ashley, a number of years ago, where I realized the familiar feeling I was having was the feeling of someone trying to groom me and pull me in. And, my feeling is strong and could be accurate, but it might not be accurate. So I'm not going to go around and say that person is an abuser, but I'm going to listen to my gut, and I'm going to say, I don't want to ever be alone with that person. And I'm going to tell people close to me who he has access to, I would prefer if you're never alone with that person, because he activates me or triggers me or whatever. So even people who we study this, we know this, we can still be tricked. We can still be fooled. Don't ever get so arrogant that you think that you can tell whether or not there's an abuser present, because their entire life is designed to keep you from knowing that there's an abuser present.
And no one can ever or should ever get angry with you because you're protecting yourself. So if you don't want to be alone with somebody, you bring someone along and they start acting like, why are you doing that? That's about them.
Yeah.
That they wanted you isolated, right? Because
Yes.
if it was okay, it would be in the light.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you have to realize being assertive is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with you for protecting yourself. And once you get to know someone and you don't have to do that anymore, then fine. But if you're protecting yourself for a reason, because you're protecting your family or whatever, you're important. And so is your family. And don't ever apologize to anyone for that, because if they want to have you feel bad, there's a flag. And that's a reason to keep walking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's, you just talked about a whole bunch of different types of entitlement. If I want to see you alone and I show up and I'm not alone and they get mad at you, that's entitlement. You owe me what I want, which is to isolate you. If you set boundaries, you know, you don't get to set boundaries. I'm entitled to access to all of you whenever I want. And you never, ever, ever owe anyone an explanation for why you don't want to be around somebody. You don't owe that person. You don't owe your parents, your partner, your pastor, your rabbi. You don't owe anybody an explanation for why you do not want to be around somebody.
That's good. Wow. Thank you both. This has been fantastic. I've learned a lot. I know from the comments coming in, people listening have learned a lot. And I thank you both for your time. And everybody, I have pinned inside the group at the top where you can find Maureen and Dr. Debra, books, websites, speaking, all that kind of stuff. So please be sure to check that out. And if you're listening to this after the 30 Days of Courage, and this is maybe on our YouTube channel or on our podcast, then it'll be below in the description. I have a couple quick announcements, so don't go away. These are important. They're going to be interesting to you. But we are doing our self-care challenges through the month of October, and this week we're on self-care challenge number 3. And if you participate in the self-care challenges, which are pinned to the top of the group in the featured section, every week, if you follow those instructions, you'll be entered into a drawing to win a prize. And this is the prize for our upcoming week, for week 3. It's a Burt's Bees kit, and we've had several other kits that we have sent out to people. Last week it was Dogs Against Anxiety, and before that it was a tea drops box. So we try to keep everything kind of new and fresh. But if you participate in all 4 self-care challenges, even if you have to go back and catch up, if you participate in all of those before the end of the month, we are going to be putting you into a grand prize drawing, and you'll be getting something even bigger at the end if you win that. So make sure that you're using these challenges. This is a way to invest in yourself and your healing. And then I just want to remind you, we have another panel coming up next week. It's going to be so powerful. It's all about religious trauma syndrome, so very relevant to a lot of the people in our group. And then after that, to close out the 30 Days of Courage, we're doing something we've never done before. It's going to be a live game show. And this is going to be a trivia game show that's going to be really fun. We're calling it the Ultimate Courage Showdown. I've got to work on my little voice for our game show, but it's going to be corny, it's going to be funny, but it's going to have some really great contestants, and all of the questions are going to be surrounded around things that we've learned in these different panel discussions. And so you're definitely going to want to show up. You'll get to watch the contestants compete on this trivia contest, and you'll be able to drop your answers in the chat box to see if you can get the question before they do. So it'll be a lot of fun, something you'll definitely want to participate in. And then on Saturday, we have our peer support group. It's inside a Zoom room, and you can find the details in the event section with how you can join that. But this is a great place to get to know other survivors. Maureen, I believe she is actually hosting this next coming one. She's hosted one before, and then the week after that we're having Marianne come and do one of the groups again. And we've just been getting such tremendous feedback of people who are participating in these self-care challenges, showing up for the support groups. And We just want to offer this to you as a gift to help you take the next steps in your healing. But you've got to take the gift. You got to show up for yourself. That's our theme for this month, is showing up for your own healing. Thank you all so much for showing up tonight and tuning in to this panel discussion. Love you all so much. And as always, live with courage.